Lesson 15. Explain risk management processes. Lesson Introduction. Effective risk management practices involve systematically identifying, assessing, mitigating, and monitoring organizational risks. Audits provide an independent and objective evaluation of processes, controls, and compliance, ensuring adherence to standards and identifying gaps that pose risks. On the other hand, assessments help evaluate the effectiveness of risk management strategies, identify potential vulnerabilities, and prioritize mitigation efforts. By combining audits and assessments, organizations can comprehensively understand risks, implement appropriate controls, and continuously monitor and adapt their risk management strategies to protect against potential threats. These practices are essential for maintaining proactive and resilient security operations while ensuring compliance with legal mandates. Lesson Objectives. In this lesson, you will do the following. Explain risk management processes and concepts. Explain business impact analysis concepts. Understand various risk responses. Learn about vendor assessments and management practices. Explore internal and external assessment concepts. Learn about different penetration testing methods. Rate your confidence. Topic 15A. Risk management processes and concepts. Exam objectives covered. 5.2 Explain elements of the risk management process. Risk management involves identifying potential issues, assessing their potential impact on the organization, and implementing controls to mitigate them. Key concepts include risk identification, risk assessment, mitigation, and monitoring. Risk appetite and risk tolerance are important in defining how much risk an organization is willing to accept. Methods such as ad hoc, recurring, one-time, or continuous risk assessments help organizations accurately understand their risks. Ultimately, effective risk management helps safeguard the organization's information assets, maintain regulatory compliance, and support strategic objectives. Rate your confidence. Risk identification and assessment. Risk identification is fundamental to managing cybersecurity risks. It includes recognizing risks such as malware attacks, phishing attempts, insider threats, equipment failures, software vulnerabilities, and non-technical risks like inadequate policies or training. Risk identification methods include vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, security audits, threat intelligence, and other methods. Risk identification is the foundation for risk assessment and management practices. Effective risk identification processes allow organizations to make informed decisions regarding resource allocation, risk mitigation strategies, and overall risk management practices. Risk assessment. Risk assessment is a core component of a cybersecurity program that evaluates previously identified risks to determine their potential impact on the organization. Risk assessment methodologies include ad hoc, recurring, one-time, or continuous. Ad hoc risk assessments are conducted as needed, often in response to specific incidents, such as news of a new, actively exploited zero-day vulnerability or environmental changes, such as system upgrades. One-time assessments are comprehensive evaluations carried out at a particular point in time, often during the implementation of a new system or process, or to obtain an independent assessment of an organization's operational maturity. Recurring risk assessments are scheduled at regular intervals, such as annually, quarterly, or monthly, and can include audits, compliance checks, vulnerability scans, and other types of assessment. Continuous risk assessments constantly evaluate risks and are supported by specialized tools that produce real-time data, such as agent-based vulnerability scanning platforms and intrusion detection systems. Different risk assessment methods are commonly combined to ensure effective identification and management of risk. Quantitative risk assessment aims to assign concrete values to each risk factor. Image copyright 123rf.com. Risk analysis versus risk assessment. Risk analysis describes the process of identifying and evaluating potential risks and the characteristics that define them. Risk analysis aims to understand the nature and scope of risks by examining their causes, consequences, and concerns. Risk assessment is a systematic approach designed to estimate potential risk levels and their significance by interpreting data collected during risk analysis. Risk assessment considers the likelihood of an event occurring and the severity of its consequences. It may also involve prioritizing risks based on their potential impact and defining risk management strategies. Quantitative analysis. Quantitative risk analysis aims to assign concrete values to each risk factor. Single loss expectancy, SLE, the amount that would be lost in a single occurrence of the risk factor. This is determined by multiplying the value of the asset by an exposure factor, EF. EF is the percentage of the asset value that would be lost. For example, it may be determined that a tornado weather event will damage 40% of a building. The exposure factor in this case is 40% because only part of the asset is lost. If the building is worth $200,000, this event SLE is 200,000*0.4 or $80,000. Annualized loss expectancy, ALE, the amount that would be lost over the course of a year. This is determined by multiplying the SLE by the annualized rate of occurrence, ARO. ARO describes the number of times in a year that an event occurs. In our previous, highly simplified example, if it is anticipated that a tornado weather event will cause an impact twice per year, then the ARO is considered to be simply 2. The ELE is the cost of the event, SLE, multiplied by the number of times in a year it occurs. In the tornado example, SLE is $80,000 and ARO is 2, so the ALE is $160,000. This number is useful when considering different ways to protect the building from tornadoes. If it is known that tornadoes will have a $160,000 per year average cost, then this number can be used as a comparison when considering the cost of various protections. It is important to realize that the value of an asset does not refer solely to its material value. The two principal additional considerations are direct costs associated with the asset being compromised, downtime, and consequent costs to intangible assets, such as the company's reputation. For example, a server may have a material cost of a few $100s. If the server were stolen, the costs incurred from not being able to do business until it can be recovered or replaced could run to thousands of dollars. In addition, the period of interruption during which orders cannot be taken or go unfulfilled may lead customers to seek alternative support. Loss of thousands of sales and goodwill. The value of quantitative analysis is its ability to develop tangible numbers that reflect real money. Quantitative analysis helps to justify the costs of various controls. When analysts can associate cost savings with a control, it is easy to justify its expense. For example, it is easy to justify the money spent on a load balancer to eliminate losses from website downtime that exceeded the cost of the load balancer. Unfortunately, such direct and clear associations are uncommon. The problem with quantitative risk assessment is that the process of determining and assigning these values is complex and time-consuming. The accuracy of the values assigned is also difficult to determine without historical data. Often, it has to be based on subjective guesswork. However, over time and with experience, this approach can yield a detailed and sophisticated description of assets and risks and provide a sound basis for justifying and prioritizing security expenditure. Qualitative analysis. Qualitative risk analysis is a method used in risk management to assess risks based on subjective judgment and qualitative factors rather than precise numerical data. Qualitative risk analysis aims to provide a qualitative understanding of risks, their potential impact, and the likelihood of their occurrence. Often referred to as risk analysis using words, not numbers, this approach helps identify and prioritize intangible risks. One of the benefits of qualitative risk analysis is its simplicity and ease of use. It does not require complex mathematical calculations or extensive data collection, making it a more accessible approach. It allows for a quick initial assessment of risks, enabling organizations to identify and focus on the most significant issues. Qualitative risk analysis frames risks by considering their causes, consequences, and potential interdependencies to improve risk communication and decision-making. Qualitative risk analysis has some limitations. It is subjective in nature and heavily relies on expert judgment, which often introduces biases and inconsistencies if expert opinions differ. The lack of numerical data and qualitative risk analysis may make communicating risks to stakeholders who prefer quantitative information challenging. Despite these limitations, qualitative risk analysis is important because it provides a simplified description of risks and can help quickly draw attention to significant issues. Inherent risk. The result of a quantitative or qualitative analysis is a measure of inherent risk. Inherent risk is the level of risk before any type of mitigation has been attempted. In theory, security controls or countermeasures could be introduced to address every risk factor. The difficulty is that security controls can be expensive, so it is important to balance the cost of the control with the cost associated with the risk. It is not possible to eliminate risk. Rather, the aim is to mitigate risk factors to the point where the organization is exposed only to a level of risk that it can tolerate. The overall status of risk management is referred to as risk posture. Risk posture shows which risk response options can be identified and prioritized. For example, an organization might identify the following priorities: regulatory requirements to deploy security controls and make demonstrable efforts to reduce risk. Examples of legislation and regulation that mandate risk controls include SOX, HIPAA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, the Homeland Security Act, PCI DSS regulations, and various personal data protection measures. High-value asset, regardless of the likelihood of the threats. Threats with high likelihood, that is, high RO. Procedures, equipment, or software that increase the likelihood of threats. For example, legacy applications, lack of user training, old software versions, unpatched software, running unnecessary services, not having auditing procedures in place, and so on. Heat map. Another simple approach is the heat map or traffic light impact matrix. For each risk, a simple red, yellow, or green indicator can be put into each column to represent the severity of the risk, its likelihood, cost of controls, and so on. This approach is simplistic, but does give an immediate impression of where efforts should be concentrated to improve security.
Description.
The data in the grid is as follows: legacy Windows clients, impact, yellow indicator, ARO, red indicator, cost of controls, yellow indicator and overall risk, red indicator untrained staff, impact, green indicator, ARO, yellow indicator, cost of controls, green indicator and overall risk, yellow indicator no antivirus software, impact, yellow indicator, ARO, red indicator, cost of controls, yellow indicator and overall risk, red indicator. Traffic light impact grid. FIPS 199, NVL pubs, NIS, gov/NISPubs/FIPS/NIS, FIPS 199 PDF discusses how to apply security categorizations, SC, to information systems based on the impact that a breach of confidentiality, integrity, or availability would have on the organization as a whole. Potential impacts can be classified as the following: low, minor damage or loss to an asset or loss of performance, though essential functions remain operational. Moderate, significant damage or loss to assets or performance. High, major damage or loss or the inability to perform one or more essential functions. Rate your
Confidence. Continue. Category.
Risk management strategies. Risk management strategies describe the proactive and systematic approaches used to identify, assess, prioritize, and mitigate risks to minimize their negative impacts. Risk mitigation or remediation is the overall process of reducing exposure to or the effects of risk factors. A countermeasure that reduces exposure to a threat or vulnerability describes risk deterrence or reduction. Risk reduction refers to controls that can either make a risk incident less likely or less costly, or perhaps both. For example, if fire is a significant threat, a policy strictly controlling the use of flammable materials on-site reduces likelihood, while a system of alarms and sprinklers reduces impact by, hopefully, containing any incident to a small area. Another example is off-site data backup. which provides a remediation option in the event of servers being destroyed by fire. Avoidance means to stop the activity that is causing risk. For example, a company may develop an internally developed application for managing inventory and then try to sell it. During the sales process, the application may be discovered to have numerous security vulnerabilities that generate complaints and threats of legal action. The company may decide that the cost of maintaining the security of the software is not worth the revenue it generates and its development. Avoidance is infrequently a credible option. Risk transference. Transference or sharing means assigning risk to a third party, such as an insurance company. Specific cybersecurity insurance or cyber liability coverage protects against fines and liabilities arising from data breaches and attacks. Note that in this sort of case, it is relatively simple to transfer the obvious risks, but risks to the company's reputation remain. If a customer's credit card details are stolen because they used your unsecure e-commerce application, the customer won't care if you or a third party were nominally responsible for security. It is also unlikely that legal liabilities could be completely transferred in this way. For example, insurance terms are likely to require that best practice risk controls have been implemented. It is not possible to eliminate risks, so a major objective of risk management is to determine an appropriate level of allowable risk. The concept of allowable risk varies greatly between organizations and is dependent on industry sector, leadership style, legal environment, and other factors. Risk acceptance. Risk acceptance, or tolerance, means that no countermeasures are put in place because the level of risk does not justify it. A risk exception describes a situation where a risk cannot be mitigated using standard risk management practices or within a specified time frame due to financial, technical, or operational conditions. A risk exception formally recognizes the risk and seeks to identify alternate mitigating controls, if possible. Relevant stakeholders, such as risk managers or senior executives, must approve all risk exceptions. Risk exceptions should be temporary and reviewed on an established time frame to determine whether the risk levels have changed or if the exception can be removed. A risk exemption is a condition where risk can remain without mitigation, usually due to a strategic business decision. Risk exemptions are generally associated with situations where the cost of mitigating a risk outweighs its potential harm or can lead to significant strategic benefits when accepted. Similarly to risk exceptions, risk exemptions must be formally documented and approved by risk managers or senior executives and periodically reviewed using an established timetable. The 4 risk responses are avoid, accept, mitigate, and transfer. Residual risk and risk appetite. Where inherent risk is the risk before mitigation, residual risk is the likelihood and impact after specific mitigation, transference, or acceptance measures have been applied. Risk appetite is a strategic assessment of what level of residual risk is tolerable. Risk appetite is broad in scope. Where risk acceptance has the scope of a single system, risk appetite has a project or institution-wide scope. Risk appetite is constrained by regulation and compliance. Rate your confidence. Risk management processes. Risk management is a process for identifying, assessing, and mitigating vulnerabilities and threats to the essential functions that a business must perform to serve its customers. You can think of this process as being performed over 5 phases. Identify mission essential functions. Mitigating risk can involve a large amount of expenditure, so it is important to focus efforts. Effective risk management must focus on mission essential functions that could cause the whole business to fail if they are not performed. Part of this process involves identifying critical systems and assets that support these functions. Identify vulnerabilities. For each function or workflow, starting with the most critical, analyze systems and assets to discover and list any vulnerabilities or weaknesses to which they may be susceptible. Identify threats. For each function or workflow, identify the threat sources and actors that may take advantage of or exploit or accidentally trigger vulnerabilities. Analyze business impacts. The likelihood of a vulnerability being activated as a security incident by a threat and the impact of that incident on critical systems are the factors used to assess risk. There are quantitative and qualitative methods of analyzing impacts and likelihood. Identify risk response. For each risk, identify possible countermeasures and assess the cost of deploying additional security controls. Most risks require some sort of mitigation, but other types of response might be more appropriate for certain types and levels of risks. For each business process and each threat, you must assess the degree of risk that exists. Calculating risk is complex, but the two main variables are likelihood and impact. Likelihood is often used in qualitative analysis to describe the chance of a risk event happening subjectively. Likelihood is typically expressed using low, medium, and high or scored on a scale from 1 to 5. Probability is a quantitative measure typically expressed as a numerical value between 0 and 1 or a percentage. Probability aims to precisely measure the chance of a risk event occurring based on statistical methods. Impact is the severity of the risk if realized as a security incident. This may be determined by factors such as the value of the asset or the cost of disruption if the asset is compromised. Risk management is complex and treated very differently in companies and institutions of different sizes and with different regulatory and compliance requirements. Most companies will institute enterprise risk management, ERM, policies and procedures based on frameworks such as NIST's Risk Management Framework, RMF, or ISO 31K. These legislative and framework compliance requirements are often formalized as a Risk and Control Self-Assessment, RCSA. An organization may also contract an external party to lead the process, in which case it is referred to as a Risk and Control Assessment, RCA. ARCSA is an internal process undertaken by stakeholders to identify risks and the effectiveness with which controls mitigate those risks. RCSAs are often performed through questionnaires and workshops with department managers. The outcome of an RCSA is a report. Up-to-date RCSA reports are critical to the external audit process. Risk registers. A risk register is a document showing the results of risk assessments in a comprehensible format and includes information regarding risks, their severity, the associated owner of the risk, and all identified mitigation strategies. The register may include a heat map risk matrix, shown earlier, with columns for impact and likelihood ratings, date of identification, description, countermeasures, owner/route for escalation, and status. Risk registers are also commonly depicted as scatterplot graphs, where impact and likelihood are each an axis, and the plot point is associated with a legend that includes more information about the nature of the plotted risk. A risk register should be shared among stakeholders, executives, department managers, and senior technicians so that they understand the risks associated with the workflows that they manage. Risk threshold. Risk threshold defines the limits or levels of acceptable risk an organization is willing to tolerate. The risk threshold represents the boundaries within which risks are considered to be acceptable and manageable. Risk thresholds are based on various factors such as regulatory requirements, organizational objectives, stakeholder expectations, and the organization's risk appetite to help establish clear guidelines for decision-making. Organizations often define different risk thresholds for different types of risks based on their potential impact and criticality. Key risk indicators. Key risk indicators, KRIs, are critical predictive indicators organizations use to monitor and predict potential risks. These metrics provide an early indication of increasing risk exposures in different areas of the organization. KRIs assess the potential impact and likelihood of various risks so leadership teams can take proactive steps to manage them effectively. Using KRIs is closely associated with risk registers and risk management practices because KRIs provide the data needed to assess the likelihood and potential impact of each risk item tracked in a risk register. For example, a KRI may identify an increasing trend in system downtime due to IT operational issues which impact business operations. Risk managers handle this via a risk register and include details like potential impacts, lost productivity, customer dissatisfaction, mitigation steps, increasing IT resources, improving system redundancy, and the person or team responsible for managing these mitigations. A risk owner refers to the individual responsible for managing a particular risk, including identifying and assessing the risk, implementing measures to mitigate it, monitoring the effectiveness of the measures, and taking corrective actions as warranted. The risk owner has a comprehensive understanding of the risk and its potential impacts and a thorough understanding of the measures needed to manage it. This role is often assigned to leadership team members with the authority to make decisions and the ability to allocate resources for risk mitigation. The risk owner also communicates information about the risk and its status to other stakeholders. The risk appetite describes the level of risk that an organization is willing to accept. The organization's risk appetite is critical in determining which risks are added to a risk register and how they are prioritized. Risks are compared to the organization's risk appetite when identified and assessed. Risk tolerance describes the specific amount of variance an organization is willing to accept regarding measured risk levels and the established risk appetite. If a risk item's potential impact or likelihood exceeds the organization's risk tolerance, the risk is added to the risk register for appropriate management and monitoring. Risks that exceed the organization's risk tolerance by a large margin are generally prioritized and treated more urgently than other risks. In contrast, if a risk is near or slightly above the tolerance threshold, leadership teams may decide to accept it and monitor it closely. Levels of risk appetite. Level.
Description. Expansionary.
An organization with an expansionary risk appetite is willing to take on higher levels of risk in the pursuit of high returns or aggressive growth. These organizations typically operate in rapidly evolving markets or industries and must take risks to remain competitive. Expansionary risk appetites are associated with organizations launching new products, entering new markets, or making major corporate acquisitions. Conservative. An organization with a conservative risk appetite prioritizes risk avoidance. This type of organization takes a cautious approach to risks and prioritizes preserving cash, maintaining a good reputation, or ensuring regulatory compliance over pursuing aggressive growth. Neutral. An organization with a neutral risk appetite balances expansionary and conservative approaches and is willing to take on risks if they align with strategic objectives and can be managed effectively. Risk reporting. Risk reporting describes the methods used to communicate an organization's risk profile and the effectiveness of its risk management program. Effective risk reporting supports decision-making, highlights concerns, and ensures stakeholders understand the organization's risks. The content of risk reports must be relevant to its intended audience. For example, reports designed for board members must focus on strategic risks and the organization's overall risk appetite. Operational risk reports must include specific details regarding the factors contributing to risk and are appropriate for managers or technical employees. Risk reports must also clearly convey recommended risk responses, such as accepting, mitigating, transferring, or avoiding the risk. Rate your confidence. Business impact analysis. Identification of critical systems. To support the resiliency of mission-essential and primary business functions, it is crucial to perform an identification of critical systems. This means compiling an inventory of business processes and the assets that support them. Asset types include the following: people, employees, visitors, and suppliers. Tangible assets, buildings, furniture, equipment and machinery, plant, information and communication technology, ICT, equipment, electronic data files, and paper documents. Intangible assets, ideas, commercial reputation, brand, and so on. Procedures, supply chains, critical procedures, standard operating procedures. For mission-essential functions, it is important to reduce the number of dependencies between components. Dependencies are identified by performing a business process analysis, BPA, for each function. The BPA should identify the following factors: inputs, the sources of information for performing the function, including the impact if these are delayed or out of sequence. Hardware, the particular server or data center that performs the processing. Staff and other resources supporting the function. Outputs, the data or resources produced by the function. Process flow, a step-by-step description of how the function is performed. Business impact analysis, BIA, is a process that helps businesses understand the potential effects of disruptions on their operations. It involves identifying and assessing the impact of various unplanned threat scenarios on the business, such as accidents, emergencies, and disasters. By conducting a BIA, businesses can proactively create recovery strategies to minimize the impact of disruptions and ensure operational resilience. For instance, if a DDoS attack suspends an e-commerce portal for 5 hours, the business impact analysis will be able to quantify the losses from orders not made and customers moving permanently to other suppliers based on historic data. The likelihood of a DOS attack can be assessed on an annualized basis to determine annualized impact in terms of costs. This information is used to assess whether a security control, such as load balancing or managed DDoS mitigation, is worth the investment. Mission Essential Functions. A mission essential function, MEF, is one that cannot be deferred. This means that the organization must be able to perform the function as close to continually as possible, and if there is any service disruption, the mission essential functions must be restored first. Functions that act as support for the business or an MEF, but are not critical in themselves, are referred to as primary business functions, PBF. Analysis of mission essential functions is generally governed by 4 main metrics. Maximum tolerable downtime, MTD, is the longest period of time that a business function outage may occur for without causing irrecoverable business failure. Each business process can have its own MTD, such as a range of minutes to hours for critical functions, 24 hours for urgent functions, 7 days for normal functions, and so on. MTDs vary by company and event. Each function may be supported by multiple systems and assets. The MTD sets the upper limit on the amount of recovery time that system and asset owners have to resume operations. For example, an organization specializing in medical equipment may be able to exist without incoming manufacturing supplies for 3 months because it has stockpiled a sizable inventory. After 3 months, the organization will not have sufficient supplies and may not be able to manufacture additional products, therefore leading to failure. In this case, the MTD is 3 months. Recovery Time Objective, RTO, is the period following a disaster that an individual IT system may remain offline. This represents the amount of time it takes to identify that there is a problem and then perform recovery, restore from backup, or switch to an alternative system, for instance. Work Recovery Time, WRT. Following systems recovery, there may be additional work to reintegrate different systems, test overall functionality, and brief system users on any changes or different working practices so that the business function is again fully supported. RTO plus WRT must not exceed MTD. Recovery Point Objective, RPO, is the amount of data loss that a system can sustain, measured in time. That is, if a database is destroyed by a virus, an RPO of 24 hours means that the data can be recovered from a backup copy to a point not more than 24 hours before the database was infected. RPO is determined by identifying the maximum acceptable data loss an organization can tolerate in the event of a disaster or system failure and is established by considering RTO plus WRT must not exceed MTD. Recovery Point Objective, RPO, is the amount of data loss that a system can sustain, measured in time. That is, if a database is destroyed by a virus, an RPO of 24 hours means that the data can be recovered from a backup copy to a point not more than 24 hours before the database was infected. RPO is determined by identifying the maximum acceptable data loss an organization can tolerate in the event of a disaster or system failure and is established by considering factors such as business requirements, data criticality, and regulatory or contractual obligations. The calculation of RPO directly impacts the frequency of data backups, data replication requirements, recovery site selection, and technologies that support failover and high availability.
Description.
A rightwards arrow is labeled time. Maximum tolerable downtime, MTD, is the longest period of time following a disaster. Recovery Time Objective, RTO, follows the disaster and is followed by Work Recovery Time, WRT. Metrics governing mission essential functions. Images copyright 123rf.com. For example, A customer relationship management database might be able to sustain the loss of a few hours or days' worth of data because employees can generally remember who they have contacted and the conversations they had over this time span. Conversely, order processing is generally more time-sensitive, as data losses will represent lost orders, and it may be impossible to recapture them or the related processes initiated by order processing systems, such as accounting and fulfillment data. MTD and RPO help to determine which business functions are critical and also to specify appropriate risk countermeasures. For example, if your RPO is measured in days, then a simple tape backup system should suffice. If RPO is zero or measured in minutes or seconds, a more expensive server cluster backup and redundancy solution will be required. Mean time to repair, MTTR, and mean time between failures, MTBF, are key performance indicators, KPIs, used to measure the reliability and efficiency of systems, processes, and equipment. Both metrics are important to risk management processes, providing measurable insights into potential risks and supporting risk mitigation strategies. MTTR and MTBF guide decisions regarding system design, maintenance practices, and redundancy or failover requirements. Mean time between failures, MTBF, represents the expected lifetime of a product. The calculation for MTBF is the total operational time divided by the number of failures. For example, if you have 10 appliances that run for 50 hours and 2 of them fail, the MTBF is 250 hours per failure, 10 by 50/2. Mean time to repair, MTTR, is a measure of the time taken to correct a fault so that the system is restored to full operation. This can also be described as mean time to replace or recover. MTTR is calculated as the total number of hours of unplanned maintenance divided by the number of failure incidents. This average value can be used to estimate whether a recovery time objective, RTO, is achievable. A lower MTTR indicates quicker restoration of functionality, reducing downtime and potential disruptions to operations. This information helps allocate resources, prioritize maintenance activities, and optimize repair processes. MTBF identifies the average time between system or equipment failures. A higher MTBF suggests greater reliability and longer intervals between failures, which can affect maintenance scheduling, spare part management, and overall system performance. Based on MTBF data, organizations can make decisions regarding maintenance strategies, equipment replacement, and investments in improving reliability. Rate your
Topic 15b.
Vendor management concepts. Exam objectives covered. 5.3 explain the processes associated with third-party risk assessment and management. Third-party risk assessment involves several important processes integral to effective risk management practices. These processes include vendor due diligence, risk identification and assessment, ongoing monitoring, and incident response planning. Vendor due diligence involves evaluating and selecting vendors based on their security practices, financial stability, regulatory compliance, and reputation. Risk identification and assessment include identifying potential risks associated with vendor relationships and assessing their potential impact on the organization's operations, data, and reputation. Ongoing monitoring ensures that vendors maintain security controls, adhere to contractual obligations, and promptly address identified risks or vulnerabilities. These processes are critical in risk management practices as they help organizations identify, assess, and mitigate risks associated with third-party relationships. Organizations can proactively manage and reduce risks by implementing robust third-party risk assessment processes, protecting assets, maintaining regulatory compliance, and fostering a safe and secure operational environment. Vendor selection. Vendor selection practices must systematically evaluate and assess potential vendors to minimize risks associated with outsourcing or procurement. It typically includes several steps, such as identifying risk criteria, conducting due diligence, and selecting vendors based on their risk profile. Risk management practices aim to identify and mitigate risks related to financial stability, operational reliability, data security, regulatory compliance, and reputation. The goal is to select vendors who align with the organization's risk tolerance and demonstrate the capability to manage risks effectively. Third-party vendor assessment. A third-party vendor refers to an external person or organization that provides goods, services, or technology solutions to another organization but operates independently. Third-party vendors play a significant role in business operations by offering specialized expertise, products, and services that support or enable the organization's own capabilities. Third-party vendors can range from technology, software, and cloud service providers to suppliers and contractors and collectively represent an organization's supply chain. Third-party vendors bring efficiency, cost-effectiveness, expertise, and innovation to organizations, but also introduce potential risks as they may have access to sensitive data, infrastructure, or critical processes. Proper vendor assessment and continuous monitoring ensure third-party vendors adhere to security standards and regulatory compliance and fulfill their obligations to safeguard business operations from potential vulnerabilities and disruptions. Vendor assessment is a critical component of governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, frameworks, and plays a pivotal role in maintaining the security of IT and business operations. Vendor assessment includes carefully evaluating third-party vendor capabilities, practices, and security measures before engaging in business partnerships or entrusting them with sensitive data and critical services. The significance of vendor assessment stems from the fact that organizations increasingly rely on external vendors for various aspects of their operations, such as technology solutions, cloud services, supply chain management, and outsourcing. By thoroughly assessing vendors, businesses can ensure that their partners adhere to established security standards, comply with regulatory requirements, and mitigate potential risks effectively. Engaging with vendors with weak security practices or inadequate risk management measures can introduce significant vulnerabilities. A study by Pohman Institute and Bonger identified the following statistics. Companies allow 89 vendors to access their networks weekly, on average. 69% of organizations have experienced a data breach due to vendor security shortcomings. 65% of respondents say that it's hard to manage cybersecurity risks associated with third-party vendors. 64% of respondents said that their organization focuses more on cost than security when outsourcing. https://securities2dio.com/top-7-vendor-related-breaches-of-all-time. Evaluating vendors is vital for businesses to adhere to regulations, as these regulations often pertain to the vendors they collaborate with. Ensuring vendors comply with applicable regulations and industry standards protects the organization from fines and other legal consequences. Additionally, vendor assessments provide evidence of due diligence and compliance checks, which are crucial during audits and investigations. Vendor assessment also promotes transparency and accountability. Organizations gain insight into vendor security capabilities by thoroughly evaluating vendor security practices. This knowledge supports better risk assessment and vendor selection. Furthermore, vendor assessments create a framework for monitoring and reviewing vendors' performance and security practices. Continuous evaluation helps ensure that vendors maintain their commitment to security and remain aligned with the organization. Conflict of interest. A conflict of interest arises when an individual or organization has competing interests or obligations that could compromise their ability to act objectively, impartially, or in the best interest of another party. When performing vendor assessments, it is vital to determine whether a vendor's interests, relationships, or affiliations may influence their ability to provide unbiased recommendations, fair pricing, or deliver services without bias. Organizations must diligently identify and address potential conflicts of interest, including scrutinizing the vendor's affiliations, relationships with competitors or stakeholders, financial interests, and any potential bias that could compromise their integrity. Some examples of conflict of interest include the following items. Financial interests. A vendor may have a financial interest in recommending specific products or services due to partnerships, commissions, or financial incentives that bias their recommendations and lead to selecting options that may not fit the organization's needs. Personal relationships. If a vendor has personal relationships or close ties with decision makers within the organization, it can influence decision making and compromise the objective evaluation of other vendors. Competitive relationships. A vendor may have a business relationship or competitive interest with another vendor under consideration, which can lead a vendor to prioritize their own interests or partnerships over the organization's best interests. Insider information. In cases where a vendor has access to confidential or proprietary information about other vendors or the organization's strategic plans, the vendor may use this information to gain an unfair advantage or manipulate the selection process. Rate your vendor assessment methods. Due diligence, in the context of vendor assessment and selection, refers to the comprehensive and systematic process of gathering and analyzing information about potential vendors to assess their suitability, reliability, and integrity. It involves conducting a thorough investigation and evaluation of vendors based on predetermined criteria, including financial stability, reputation, technical capabilities, security practices, regulatory compliance, and past performance. Due diligence aims to minimize risks and support informed decisions during the vendor selection process by verifying the accuracy of vendor claims, identifying potential red flags, and ensuring alignment with the organization's needs. Through due diligence, organizations can uncover any undisclosed risks or issues, clearly understand the vendor's capabilities and limitations, and evaluate the potential impact on business operations. Penetration testing. Penetration testing evaluates vendors' security posture and identifies potential vulnerabilities in their systems, networks, and applications. By conducting penetration tests on vendor infrastructure or seeking evidence that penetration tests have been performed, organizations can gain insights into the vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit, helping them understand the potential risks associated with partnering with the vendor. Penetration testing provides a comprehensive assessment of the vendor's security resilience, allowing businesses to make informed decisions about their suitability as a vendor. Penetration tests improve the vendor assessment process by validating the effectiveness of security controls, uncovering hidden weaknesses, and assisting risk management practices. Right to audit clause. A right to audit clause is a contractual provision that grants an organization the authority to conduct audits or assessments of vendor operational practices, information systems, and security controls. The right to audit clause supports vendor assessment practices by allowing organizations to validate and verify the vendor's compliance with contractual obligations, security standards, and regulatory requirements. By exercising the right to audit, organizations can gain transparency into the vendor's operations, identify gaps or deficiencies, and ensure that the vendor maintains the expected level of security and compliance at all times. Evidence of internal audits. When performing vendor due diligence, looking for evidence that the vendor has internal audit practices is crucial. Internal audit provides an independent and objective evaluation of an organization's internal controls, risk management practices, and compliance with policies and regulations. By examining the presence and effectiveness of internal audits within a vendor's operations, businesses can gain confidence in the vendor's commitment to good governance, risk management, and compliance. Evidence of internal audit demonstrates that the vendor has established mechanisms for internal oversight, periodic assessments, and continuous improvement of their processes. It demonstrates a proactive approach to risk identification and mitigation and a commitment to secure operations. Independent assessments. Organizations often rely on independent assessments as crucial vendor selection criteria. Independent assessments involve engaging with independent experts to evaluate and verify vendor capabilities, security, and compliance practices. These assessments provide an objective and unbiased evaluation of vendor capabilities. By leveraging independent assessments, organizations can benefit from specialized knowledge and industry best practice approaches to security assessments that internal teams may not know. Leveraging independent assessments help mitigate potential biases, ensure thorough evaluations, and support informed decision-making during the vendor selection process. Additionally, periodic reassessment of existing vendors fosters continuous improvement in the vendor's security practices. Supply chain analysis. Supply chain refers to the interconnected network of entities involved in producing, distributing, and delivering goods or services from raw material suppliers to manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and ultimately, the end customer. It is a complex ecosystem involving collaboration between numerous vendors at various stages. Vendors are essential in the supply chain as they provide goods, services, and expertise contributing to the final product or service. Vendors often include raw material suppliers, manufacturers, logistics providers, and technology solution providers. Each vendor within the supply chain has its own set of capabilities, processes, and potential risks. Managing and assessing these vendors is crucial to ensure the smooth flow of materials, minimize disruptions, maintain quality standards, and uphold security and compliance requirements throughout the supply chain. Supply chain analysis evaluates the risks and vulnerabilities associated with the various entities, vendors, involved in a supply chain by examining the security practices, capabilities, and reliability of individual vendors within the supply chain network and how security issues with one vendor in the chain may compromise the security of the organization's environment. This information helps organizations identify weak links, vulnerabilities, and potential points of compromise within the supply chain so they can be addressed before they cause problems. Performing vendor site visits offer first-hand observation and assessment of a vendor's physical facilities, operational processes, and overall risk management practices, allowing for a more comprehensive evaluation of potential risks and vulnerabilities. Vendor monitoring. Vendor monitoring involves continuously overseeing and evaluating vendors to ensure ongoing adherence to security standards, compliance requirements, and contractual obligations. It may include regular performance reviews, periodic assessments, and real-time monitoring of vendor activities. This proactive approach allows organizations to promptly identify and address potential risks or issues. Rate your legal agreements. Legal agreements play a vital role in supporting vendor relationships by establishing both parties' rights, responsibilities, and expectations. Legal agreements serve as the foundation for the vendor-client relationship, providing a framework for conducting business and addressing potential issues or disputes that may arise. Initial agreements. Different types of agreements are needed to govern vendor relationships based on the specific nature of the engagement and the services being provided. The following agreements play distinct roles in setting up vendor relationships. Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, a non-binding agreement that outlines the intentions, shared goals, and general terms of cooperation between parties. MOUs serve as a preliminary step to establish a common understanding before proceeding with a more formal agreement. Non-disclosure agreement, NDA, ensures the confidentiality and protection of sensitive information shared during the relationship. An NDA is a binding agreement and likely to be signed alongside an MOU. Memorandum of Agreement, MOA, a formal agreement that defines the parties' specific terms, conditions, and responsibilities. MOAs establish a legally binding relationship covering objectives, roles, resources, and obligations. They provide a trustworthy framework for collaboration. Business Partnership Agreement, BPA, governs long-term strategic partnerships between organizations. BPAs encompass various objectives, including goals, financial arrangements, decision-making processes, intellectual property rights, confidentiality, and dispute resolution mechanisms. BPAs provide a means for governing collaborative and mutually beneficial relationships. Master Service Agreement, MSA, outlines the overall terms and conditions of a specific contract, such as provisioning cloud resources or ticketing/help desk support. An MSA includes scope, pricing, deliverables, and intellectual property rights. Detailed agreements, where initial agreements establish a framework for collaboration or service provision, other agreements can be implemented to specify terms for operational detail. These help to govern vendor relationships effectively. Service Level Agreement, SLA, defines the specific performance metrics, quality standards, and service levels expected from the vendor. Statement of Work, SOW/Work Order, WO, details a vendor project or engagement scope, deliverables, timelines, and responsibilities. SOWs clarify the vendor's tasks, the organization's expectations, and the agreed-upon deliverables. They are crucial for managing project execution and ensuring vendor and organization alignment. Questionnaires. Questionnaires gather vendor information about their security practices, controls, and risk management strategies to help organizations assess a vendor's security posture, identify vulnerabilities, and evaluate their capabilities. Questionnaires provide a structured means of obtaining consistent vendor information, enabling more effective risk analysis and comparison fairly and consistently. Questionnaires collect information about the vendor's security policies, procedures, and controls, including data protection, access management, incident response, and disaster recovery. The questionnaire may ask about a vendor's compliance with industry-specific regulations and standards, such as GDPR, HIPAA, ISO 27001, or PCI DSS. It may also seek details about the vendor's security training and awareness programs for employees and their approach to conducting third-party security assessments and audits. Additionally, the questionnaire may explore the vendor's incident response capabilities, breach history, and insurance coverage. The answers to vendor risk management questionnaires should be validated by requesting supporting documentation, conducting site visits or audits, performing background checks, contacting references or previous clients, and utilizing third-party verification services to ensure the accuracy and reliability of the vendor's responses. Rules of engagement. Rules of engagement, ROE, define the parameters and expectations for vendor relationships. These rules outline the responsibilities, communication methods, reporting mechanisms, security requirements, and compliance obligations that vendors must adhere to. Rules of engagement establish clear guidelines for the vendor's behavior, activities, and access to sensitive information. By setting these boundaries, organizations can establish a controlled and secure environment, mitigating the potential risks associated with third-party relationships. Some important elements included in a ROE include the following. Roles and responsibilities clearly define the roles and responsibilities of the vendor and client in managing risks, including specifying who is responsible for identifying, assessing, and mitigating various types of risks. Security requirements outline the security standards, practices, and controls the vendor must adhere to, including provisions related to data protection, access controls, encryption, incident response, and regular security assessments. Compliance obligations state the regulatory and compliance obligations the vendor must meet, ensuring they align with the client's industry-specific requirements, including privacy, data security, and any other applicable legal or industry regulations. Reporting and communication establish protocols for timely reporting of security incidents, breaches, or potential risks, including defining the reporting channels, frequency, and level of detail required to ensure effective risk communication and management. Change management outline procedures for managing changes or updates to systems, processes, or services that could impact security and introduce new risks, including change approval processes, testing requirements, and documentation practices. Contractual provisions include provisions related to indemnification, liability, insurance, and termination rights in case of security breaches or failure to meet risk management obligations. These provisions help allocate responsibilities and provide legal recourse in case of noncompliance or breaches. Rate your confidence.
Continue.
Topic 15C. Audits and assessments. Exam objectives covered. 5.5 explain types and purposes of audits and assessments. Audits and assessments are crucial to maintaining trustworthy operations. Audits involve systematically evaluating processes, controls, and compliance with established standards, policies, and regulations. They ensure that an organization's operations align with defined requirements, identify gaps, and provide recommendations for improvement. On the other hand, assessments involve evaluating the effectiveness and efficiency of various aspects of an organization's operations, such as cybersecurity, risk management, and internal controls. They help identify vulnerabilities, assess risks, and provide insights for enhancing security measures. Both audits and assessments play a vital role in maintaining compliance, mitigating risks, and continuously improving an organization's overall security and operational performance. Rate your attestation and assessments. Attestation refers to verifying and validating the accuracy, reliability, and effectiveness of security controls, systems, and processes implemented within an organization. It involves an independent and objective examination by a qualified and trusted entity, such as an auditor or assessor. Attestation is a formal declaration or confirmation that an organization's security controls and practices comply with specific standards, regulations, or best practices and provides assurance to stakeholders, such as management, customers, business partners, and regulators, that an organization's security measures are adequate and effective in protecting sensitive information, mitigating risks, and maintaining data confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Internal and external assessments. Using internal and external audit and assessment methods is essential for a comprehensive and effective evaluation of an organization's systems, controls, and management processes. The organization's own employees conduct internal audits and provide an in-depth assessment of the organization's business processes. Internal teams can conduct regular, focused assessments that align with the organization's needs and priorities and support continuous monitoring and improvement of internal controls, governance and risk management practices, and operational efficiency. In contrast, independent third-party service providers conduct external audits and assessments that utilize specialized expertise and knowledge in specific domains, regulations, and industry best practices. External auditors convey an impartial and objective evaluation of business practices that is impossible to obtain using internal teams. External audits ensure that the organization's practices are measured against recognized industry standards and help identify improvement areas that internal audit teams may have missed. Organizations can achieve several important objectives by utilizing internal and external audit and assessment methods. Using both approaches helps facilitate a balanced and comprehensive view of the organization's risk management practices, controls, and compliance efforts. Combining internal and external audits enhances the organization's risk management capabilities. Internal audits enable continuous monitoring, early detection of issues, and timely remediation, while external audits validate the organization's controls, compliance, and risk mitigation efforts. Additionally, utilizing both internal and external methods fosters transparency and accountability. Internal audits promote a culture of self-assessment and continuous improvement within the organization, while external audits provide stakeholders with independent assurance and validation of the organization's practices. This combination helps build trust among stakeholders, including customers, business partners, regulatory bodies, and investors. An often overlooked benefit, the collaboration between internal and external auditors facilitates knowledge sharing and professional development, improving the quality of both teams' assessments. Internal auditors can learn from the expertise and best practices of external auditors, while external auditors gain a deeper understanding of the organization's operating environment and the challenges they face that often impede compliance initiatives. Internal assessments. Approach.
Description.
Compliance assessment. Internal compliance assessments ensure operating practices align with laws, regulations, standards, policies, and ethical requirements. These assessments evaluate the effectiveness of internal controls, identify noncompliance or risk areas, and communicate findings to stakeholders, such as risk managers. Audit Committee. Audit committees provide independent oversight and assurance regarding an organization's financial reporting, internal controls, and risk management practices. These committees are typically composed of board members independent of the organization's management team. Audit committees aim to enhance the integrity of financial statements, ensure compliance with legal and regulatory requirements, monitor the effectiveness of internal controls, oversee the external audit process, and promote transparency and accountability. Audit committees are critical in fostering confidence among shareholders, stakeholders, and the public by providing an independent and objective assessment of the organization's financial practices and contributing to sound corporate governance. Self-assessment. Self-assessments allow individuals or organizations to evaluate their performance, practices, and adherence to established criteria against predetermined metrics and measures. Self-assessments help identify strengths, weaknesses, and areas for improvement, enabling individuals or organizations to take proactive measures to enhance their effectiveness and outcomes. Self-assessments imply internal personnel with the expertise, knowledge, and understanding of the assessed area are available to complete them. Internal assessments are required for government agencies according to the NIST RMF, PCI-DSS, and others. External assessments. Approach.
Description.
Regulatory. Regulatory authorities or agencies perform assessments to ensure compliance with specific laws, regulations, or industry standards. Regulatory assessments evaluate whether organizations adhere to mandatory regulatory requirements and promote a culture of compliance. Regulatory assessments typically involve inspections, audits, or reviews of processes, practices, and controls to verify compliance, identify deficiencies, and enforce regulatory obligations. Regulatory assessments play a critical role in safeguarding public interests, protecting consumers, maintaining market integrity, and upholding industry standards. They help mitigate risks, ensure fair competition, and enhance transparency and accountability in regulated industries. Examination. An external examination typically refers to an independent and formal evaluation conducted by external parties, such as auditors or regulators, to assess the accuracy, reliability, and compliance of an organization's financial statements, processes, controls, or specific aspects of its operations. External examinations focus on verifying information accuracy and ensuring compliance with applicable laws, regulations, or industry standards. Examples of external examinations include financial statement audits, regulatory compliance audits, and specific assessments of control environments. Assessment. An external assessment generally refers to a broad evaluation conducted by external experts or consultants to assess an organization's overall performance, practices, capabilities, or specific focus areas. External assessments can encompass various elements, such as strategy, operational efficiency, risk management, cybersecurity, or compliance practices. The goal is to provide an objective and independent perspective on the organization's strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for improvement. Independent third-party audit. Independent third-party audits provide objective and unbiased assessments of an organization's systems, controls, processes, and compliance. The importance of independent third-party audits lies in their ability to offer an external perspective, free from any conflicts of interest or bias. Independent audits instill confidence among stakeholders, including customers, business partners, regulatory bodies, and investors, as they attest to an organization's commitment to quality, compliance, and good governance. They also help organizations demonstrate transparency, accountability, and adherence to industry standards and regulations. External entities could include certified public accountants, CPAs, external auditors, consulting firms, regulatory bodies, or specialized assessment agencies. The independence of these external assessors ensures impartiality and objectivity in the evaluation process. Rate your penetration testing. A penetration test, often shortened to pen test, uses authorized hacking techniques to discover exploitable weaknesses in the target's security systems. Pen testing is also referred to as ethical hacking. A pen test might involve the following steps. Verify a threat exists. In cybersecurity, a threat, such as system or network vulnerability, can include anything that provides a negative action or event of a system, network, or application. The use of surveillance, social engineering, network scanners, and vulnerability assessment tools can be used to identify a vector by which vulnerabilities could be exploited. Bypass security controls. Look for easy ways to attack the system. For example, if the network is strongly protected by a firewall, Is it possible to gain physical access to a computer in the building and run malware from a USB stick? Actively test security controls. Probe controls for configuration weaknesses and errors, such as weak passwords or software vulnerabilities. Exploit vulnerabilities. Prove that a vulnerability is high risk by exploiting it to gain access to data or install backdoors. The key difference from passive vulnerability assessment is that an attempt is made to actively test security controls and exploit any vulnerabilities discovered. Pen testing is an intrusive assessment technique. For example, a vulnerability scan may reveal that an SQL server has not been patched to safeguard against a known exploit. A penetration test would attempt to use the exploit to perform code injection and compromise the server. This provides active testing of security controls. Active and passive reconnaissance. Active and passive reconnaissance provide crucial information that helps penetration testers understand target systems and identify potential vulnerabilities to plan an attack effectively. A combination of active and passive reconnaissance techniques yields the most comprehensive information regarding the target environment during a penetration testing engagement. Active reconnaissance involves actively probing and interacting with target systems and networks to gather information. Active reconnaissance includes activities that generate network traffic by directly requesting information from target systems. Active reconnaissance aims to discover and obtain information about the target infrastructure, services, and potential vulnerabilities. Common techniques used in active reconnaissance include the following: port scanning, scanning a target network to identify open ports and the services running on them. Service enumeration, interacting with identified services to gather information about their versions, configurations, and potential vulnerabilities. OS fingerprinting, attempting to identify the operating system running on target machines by analyzing network responses and behavior. DNS enumeration, gathering information about the target's DNS infrastructure, such as domain names, subdomains, and IP addresses. Web application crawling, exploring web applications to identify pages, directories, and potential vulnerabilities. Passive reconnaissance involves gathering information about target systems and networks without directly interacting with them by focusing on collecting publicly available data and passively observing network traffic. Common techniques used in passive reconnaissance include open source intelligence, OSINT, collecting publicly available information from various sources like search engines, social media, public databases, and websites. Network traffic analysis, monitoring network traffic to identify patterns, devices, IP addresses, and potential vulnerabilities without actively generating traffic. Passive reconnaissance helps penetration testers gather initial information on a target's digital footprint. It is less intrusive and carries a lower detection risk than active reconnaissance techniques. Known, partially known, and unknown testing methods. The decision to use a known environment, partially known environment, or unknown environment penetration test is influenced by several factors, such as knowledge regarding the target system or network, the organization's risk appetite, and compliance requirements. Budget and resource constraints may also contribute to selecting the penetration testing method, as known environment testing generally requires fewer resources than partially known or unknown environment testing. The objectives of the penetration test influence the choice, with known environment testing suitable for assessing known vulnerabilities and partially known or unknown environment testing preferred for identifying unknown vulnerabilities. The complexity of the target system or network is also a factor, as more complex systems may necessitate more comprehensive testing methods. Organizations often combine different methods to achieve different objectives. Penetration testing method.
Description.
Known environment penetration testing. In known environment penetration testing, the tester has detailed knowledge about the target system or network, including information about the network architecture, hardware and software configurations, system vulnerabilities, and users. Partially known environment penetration testing. In partially known environment penetration testing, the tester possesses limited knowledge about the target system or network, such as information about the system architecture, specific technologies in use, or partial system configurations. During a partially known environment penetration test, the tester may employ reconnaissance techniques to gather additional information about the target, including scanning the network, fingerprinting services, or conducting open source intelligence, OSINT gathering. The information collected is used to assess security controls by simulating attack vectors and exploiting vulnerabilities. Unknown environment penetration testing. In unknown environment penetration testing, the tester has little prior knowledge about the target system or network. This type of testing aims to mimic a scenario where an attacker has no pre-existing information about the target infrastructure. The purpose is to identify potential vulnerabilities and assess the organization's ability to withstand an attack from an unknown adversary. During an unknown environment penetration test, the tester must perform extensive reconnaissance to gain knowledge about the target, such as passive information gathering, active scanning, social engineering, and other techniques to discover potential vulnerabilities. The objective is to identify weaknesses that might be exploitable by a skilled attacker. Rate your confidence.
In this demonstration, we're going to look at penetration testing tools that you can use to evaluate the security of your network or a particular host on your network. As you probably know, Linux is a very popular platform for testing network and host security. First, you need to choose a Linux distribution that you can use for penetration testing. A good place to start looking for those distributions is the DistroWatch website. Many of the Linux distributions here can be run as a live CD or installed on the hard drive. A live CD is an optical disk or a bootable USB drive that has the Linux operating system installed on it. It can also have many of the security tools you need to perform a penetration test. Because it's installed on a USB drive or an optical disk, you can insert that into the computer and boot the system off the disk. When you do, you'll have a Linux operating system up and running with the tools you need for testing. There are several advantages associated with testing this way. First, there's a wide variety of free penetration testing tools available for the Linux operating system. And if you're using a live CD, you don't have to install an operating system. If you're booting off an optical disk, there's no way for malware or anything else to actually affect the files on the disk. There are many different distributions available. You can see their names here. You can also see the purpose of the distribution listed over here. Since we're interested in security, let's go over here and look at this one. The most popular and well-accepted distribution for security and penetration testing is Kali Linux. Let's go ahead and click on that and see what we can learn. It tells us where the homepage is and a lot of other information. I have its homepage open in another tab up here. We can read a little bit more and see what tools are actually included on this distribution. I'm going to go to the download page. I see the latest version right here, Kali Linux 64-bit. And over here, I can see the checksum or the hash value. Now, I already have a copy of Kali downloaded and ready to go. We'll get to that in a minute, but I want to go back to DistroWatch, and I'll go back to the previous page. I just want to point out that there's another Linux distribution called Parrot Linux. Parrot is a distribution with a collection of various utilities that are popular with penetration testers and computer forensic professionals. Here's the link to the homepage, but I already have a tab opened up. Down here, you can read more about the project and learn about the different tools. All right, now back to Linux. My Kali Linux ISO image is downloaded and I've booted it up. Now it's asking me if I want to install it to a disk or just use it as a live CD. I'll go ahead and say, yeah, go ahead and just use it as a live CD. We'll let it launch and pretty soon we'll see the user interface. Each Linux distribution has its own set of package tools, and this one specializes in security tools. Here are some tools that Kali Linux has packaged with its distribution. Over here, you'll see the Metasploit Framework Armitage, which is a graphical user interface for that framework, Burp Suite, Beef Cross-Site Scripting Framework, and some others that we could use to do our penetration testing. Now, obviously, we don't have time in this short video to really discuss penetration testing or even look at a specific tool in depth, but I'll show you how you could penetration test using one of the pre-packaged tools that we can launch from a live CD. Let's start the Metasploit framework by clicking on it. That's going to create the database where we're going to save some of the information about hosts and other things. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and bring up Armitage, which is the graphical user interface that we can use to easily interact with the extensive commands that exist as part of the Metasploit framework. It looks like it's launched now, and we'll go ahead and launch Armitage. There it is. We'll connect, and it asks us if we want to start the remote procedure called server. We'll say, sure, that'll be great. It'll connect us up to the database. It takes just a minute to make those connections. It looks like it made the connection, and it'll launch here shortly. We are greeted with several different windows and several different options. Essentially, what we need to do is tell Armitage, and in conjunction the Metasploit framework, which hosts we want to actually try to launch an attack on. We could use an Nmap scan to import that information. We could also use the Metasploit framework scan, which will go out and ping the different machines in a certain subnet and gather information. In this case, I'm just going to keep it simple so we don't scan all the hosts on our network, and I'll just add a single host, a vulnerable Linux virtual machine that I have on the network. I know it's on the IP ending in .102. Now click Add, and then OK. It says that it added it, and we've identified a host. However, we don't have much information about it yet. But if I right-click on that host, I can scan it. Now, it'll look for all the open ports, and you can see a variety of open ports that are coming up here. We can also request additional information about services that might be running and on specific ports. So you can see here that we have certain ports, but we don't know much about the services quite yet. If we wanted to, we could try to gather some additional information. So let's do an MSF scan on that host, and that will try to identify some information about the operating system that's running on it. You'll notice that every time we run a command, it launches a separate window down here, so you could go along and close these out as you go. We know some information about this computer, some of the ports that are open, some of the services that may be running, etc. It's not a lot of data, but Metasploit keeps track of the vulnerabilities based on the ports that are open, the services that are running, the operating system that's running, and so on. You can come up here and you can actually find attacks specific to the host that you've already discovered. We'll let it go through its database and find specific exploits that it might want to try. So, that's complete. Now we could go through the attack menu and look for a specific exploit. You'll see here that based on the ports that it found, it said, hey, FTP is open. Go ahead and try these exploits. Each of these exploits will run the specific exploit when you click on them, and you have to provide specific values for the exploit. We don't actually know if any of these attacks will run, so the ability to check on that is built into the Metasploit framework. Some of the exploits have the ability to use this check, and others are older and don't. Let's try doing a check on some of these right now. It says this one doesn't support the check, this specific vulnerability is not exploitable, doesn't support the check, and so on. For ones that don't support the check, we'd have to go through and try each of them individually. Now, generally, as you're looking at an organization and trying to compromise hosts within it, you don't want to make a lot of noise or cause a lot of traffic on the network, so you try these very specific attacks based on what you discover. However, there is an option inside of Armitage and, subsequently, Metasploit that lets you do what's known as the Hail Mary, and that is just try out every single attachment possible. In the interest of time, rather than going through every single one of these attacks in a systematic way, we'll do the noisy attack because I want to show you how you can compromise the mission, and we'll see which vulnerabilities actually exist. If we click on Hail Mary here, then it says, hey, are you sure you want to do this? There's going to be a flood of exploits, and it's kind of noisy. We'll say, yes, that's what we intend to do, and then it'll go through that database of exploits and try to run them with a variety of different payloads so that it's trying to establish a connection to that remote machine. We'll let it do its thing here for a minute. It went through the database, and now it's launching each of those exploits. You'll see that the exploits are going to certain ports based on the services that are running on those. We'll give it another minute here, and it'll start taking advantage of some of those exploits. Oh look, our icon changed. That means we actually have a connection. And once it made the connection, it gathered some additional information and says, yep, this is definitely a Linux box. We can see what version of Linux and some other information too. Once we have a session, we can gather all sorts of data. We can get the dump of the passwords and the hashes associated with the passwords, and then try to crack those. Maybe we compromise the accounts and get more straightforward access, but there's all these different sessions that we could establish based on the different exploits that we just ran. Again, usually you wouldn't do the Hail Mary because it's too noisy, but in this case, it's a quick and easy demonstration of the vulnerabilities that exist on this specific machine. If we scroll down here, we'll see a variety of exploits that exist for this machine, and we'll give ourselves a little bit more space. You can see as we scroll up that it looks like there's a PHP exploit, PHP CGI injection. There's a user map, a Samba exploit, another Samba exploit, and several others that actually allowed us to have a session over to that machine. Let's go ahead and open a new console session. I'll adjust these windows so we can see better. We can run the sessions command, and you'll see that we currently have 4 sessions connecting from our machine. I know that's this IP address to this vulnerable machine right there through PHP and then through some command lines. Let me go ahead and connect to one of these sessions interactively. We'll choose session 2, and now I've got a Linux command prompt. I can do things like list the file system. I can say, who am I? And if you look at the bottom here, I have root access. With that access, I could grab the hashes for the passwords. I could execute any commands. I could set up additional backdoors. I could do all sorts of things. Penetration testing is awesome, and ultimately we're trying to compromise systems so that we know how to lock them down. To do that, we often use these prepackaged tools that come with the distribution. Kali Linux, along with Metasploit and Armitage, already prepackaged, is a fantastic tool to use for penetration testing. That's it for this demonstration. In this demo, we talked about penetration testing tools, and then we talked about the concept of a live CD and looked at a couple of Linux distributions that you could download and use in your testing.
Exercise types. Penetration testing is a crucial component of cybersecurity assessments that involves simulating real-world attacks on computer systems, networks, or applications to identify vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Different types of penetration tests exist to address specific objectives related to a security evaluation, such as testing specific systems, assessing incident response capabilities, measuring the effectiveness of physical controls, and many other areas. Different types of penetration tests allow organizations to use a flexible and prioritized approach towards security assessments. Offensive and defensive penetration testing. Offensive penetration testing, often called red teaming, is a proactive and controlled approach to simulate real-world cyber attacks on an organization's systems, networks, and applications. The primary goal of offensive penetration testing is to identify vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and potential attack vectors that malicious actors could exploit. This testing is typically performed by skilled and ethical cybersecurity professionals who mimic potential attackers' tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs. Defensive penetration testing, or blue teaming, evaluates an organization's defensive security measures, detection capabilities, incident response procedures, and overall resilience against cyber threats. Defensive penetration testing aims to assess the effectiveness of existing security controls and identify areas for improvement. Physical penetration testing. Physical penetration testing, or physical security testing, describes assessments of an organization's physical security practices and controls. It involves simulating real-world attack scenarios to identify vulnerabilities and weaknesses in physical security systems, such as access controls, surveillance, and perimeter defenses. Physical penetration testing aims to assess the effectiveness of physical security controls and identify potential entry points or weaknesses that an attacker could exploit. During physical penetration testing, a skilled tester attempts to gain unauthorized physical access to restricted areas, sensitive information, or critical assets within the organization using techniques like social engineering, tailgating, lockpicking, bypassing alarms or surveillance systems, and exploiting physical vulnerabilities. Integrated penetration testing. Integrated penetration testing refers to a holistic approach that combines different types of penetration testing methodologies and techniques to assess the overall security of an organization's systems, networks, applications, and physical infrastructure. Integrated penetration testing aims to provide a comprehensive and realistic evaluation of an organization's security operations. The importance of integrated penetration testing lies in its ability to accurately represent the organization's security posture and identify potential risks often overlooked when testing in isolated areas. For example, the combination of offensive and defensive penetration testing provides a comprehensive assessment of an organization's security posture. Offensive testing identifies vulnerabilities and weaknesses, while defensive testing evaluates the organization's ability to detect and respond to threats. By integrating both approaches, organizations can improve their security capabilities to better protect against different threats. A similar concept is called continuous pen testing, which focuses on technical vulnerabilities and often configured to leverage automation, especially for CI/CD environments. Review the following for more information. Lesson 15.
Summary.
You should be able to explain risk management, business impact analysis, and disaster recovery planning processes and metrics. Guidelines for risk management. Follow these guidelines for supporting risk management assessment. Identify and assess risks on an ongoing basis to keep pace with changing business practices. Analyze risk using qualitative and quantitative methods to help prioritize remediation efforts and allocate resources. Create a risk register to help manage and track risks, including the staff assigned to address them. Include vendor business practices in risk management and assessment. Identify and analyze the vendors included in the supply chain and ensure they have adequate security operations. Use multiple audit and assessment methods to measure the effectiveness of security controls and the organization's alignment to legal and regulatory compliance requirements. Rate your confidence.